Welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I will be your host for this conversation. Today, I'm glad to welcome Katy Fonteyn. Katy is the head of global marketing and partnerships for OJC Consulting. So, hi, Katy. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Kelly.
Now, we're going to have a longer conversation today, getting into implementation in particular. But before we do that, I'd like to have an opportunity to have the audience learn a little bit more about you. Can you share a bit more about your professional journey and where you focus today?
Well, I actually started to work in procurement almost 14 years ago after finishing my PhD in electromechanics. And I've been working in various companies as a category manager. I've also implemented procurement solutions. Then I shifted into the position of Director of Product Management at Basware. So I was leading the procurement product. And after that, I joined OJC Consulting. So we are a business and technology consulting company that offers its clients full support in their digital transformation. And we partner with market-leading solutions such as iValua, of course, to bring the best possible value to our clients.
I feel like we may have buried the lead here. You have a PhD in electromechanics?
Yes, I do.
I can barely use the TV. So I'm glad we're not talking about electromechanics today, and we're going to stick to procurement. Given that you've worked in some different spaces, what is something that you really love about procurement?
Well, procurement is a really 360 job. You have to be strategic, you have to be transactional, you have to be able to negotiate, to communicate with the end users. You have to understand data analysis. Sometimes you have to understand IT tools. And mainly you have to manage a relationship across stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders. So that's a really, really challenging but rewarding position. And then what is also interesting in procurement is that you keep on learning continuously. There is not like one day like the other one. Everything changes all the time. So really it keeps the motivation very strong. It's very stimulating intellectually as well. And you end up also discussing with the top management of a company. So it's really very, very versatile. And that's what kept me into the field.
Well, speaking of one day never being the same as the day before, today, our main topic of focus is going to be implementation. I'm sure everybody listening in has been through at least a couple of those. I've been through them. I've helped lead them. They're definitely complicated, but they're among the most important things that procurement does. The interesting thing about implementation, procurement is so process-oriented. We often think about implementation as being near the end of one process as we start to roll a solution out to the company. But the effort for implementation actually has to start much sooner. In fact, back to the earliest days when a company starts designing the RFP that they will use to select a solution. What are some of the things that a company can learn about either their own expectations or that a provider or a service provider can learn about how that company sees the implementation and plans to work just by reading that RFP?
Well, first, the RFP shows the maturity of the company. We usually get the understanding whether the company has already implemented a source-to-pay solution or not from the questions that are asked. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we also see the value that the company is looking into a solution. For example, is the user interface very important for them? Do they need a solution that is highly scalable? Where they want the solution to be implemented? Whether they want it for direct procurement or also direct and indirect. So we learn a lot of things from the company through that RFP. And if we can refine the questions, it gets us even more insights. Usually also what we see is that we learn how strong is the procurement department linked with the IT department. So does the RFP contains also IT terms or not? And then finally, we also see that the value that the company is looking into in the solution. So do they look only for cost savings, or do they want to improve their processes? do they seek also to change potentially the processes to go more with a standard way of working? So it reveals a lot of things, mainly, as I said in the beginning, about the maturity of the people who have been writing the RFP and of the maturity of the company and the direction it wants to take.
And of course, we know that that learning journey continues through the RFP process. So there's some initial vision that the company tries to capture in the RFP. That goes out to multiple providers. You're absolutely going to learn something. And it's interesting that you bring up, for instance, the importance of user interface. That could be something that procurement knows is a top objective, but different cross-functional business stakeholders start to think about during the process. So there is an evolution that probably should be given an opportunity to be incorporated in the project during and after implementation. How can procurement capture those learnings and maybe even increase maturity, to your point, and make sure that they're acted upon in the implementation phase of that project?
Well, it's a difficult question, but I think that procurement needs really to capture the clear understanding of where the company culture is today. That's very important. Is the company culture more decentralized or centralized? How things are done today? And procurement needs to really understand whether they can drive the change, a strong change by themselves, or do they actually need to get the feedback, or they need the sponsorship from the top management. So that's very important first. Procurement can never implement a single source-to-pay solution across all the countries and across all the globe if they are not mandated in a way by the top management. And then also what we see is that the implementation of the solution can be highly complex. If the change management aspect is forgotten, which is usually the case, then it's very difficult to be successful ultimately.
You know, one of the things when you talk about that change management effort, I think part of why procurement solution implementations can be so difficult is because you take someone typically within procurement who maybe has category expertise or maybe is an analyst, and you say, okay, congratulations, now you're on the implementation team and you're going to roll this out. It expects a level of IT project management, right? Change management, as you talked about, communications, that procurement doesn't necessarily have. What skills do you find are the most important in ensuring these implementations, although never without hiccup, you're always going to learn something, but to make these implementations go as smoothly as possible?
Well, I think procurement has to have a strong partnership with their IT department and their finance department, and also with the HR department. So that's, I think, the first key point to take away. Procurement alone cannot implement successfully a solution. That's a fact. Then, yes, of course, there might be a lack of specific IT skills, of the understanding on how to translate the business requirements into what we call user stories. So being very focused on the needs of developing the solution. Sometimes it can be seen difficult for some procurement implementation leads to explain the value that they are looking for in a business requirement. But all those things, I mean, they can be resolved by having the right skill set in the project. So the main skill set for the implementation is really to understand first the business, to be able to translate it into IT terms. That's where the implementation companies such as OJC come into the game, because we can support this kind of work. But then, of course, we always are very happy when we have somebody who is a little bit more technical at the customer side, who is able to really already understand the technicalities behind the solution. So not only fully business oriented. This comes usually with the roles of a development manager or process owner who is already taking the role because that person has this kind of skill set. One additional skill set that is really important is the project management capabilities of the person. And also, well, saying it obviously, communication skills, because across the whole project, there is not such a thing as as too much communication. You have to be able to communicate, and communicate all the time. So this is how I see it.
I completely agree with you. You can never over-communicate. When I think back to any of the implementations that I've ever been a part of, the biggest regret or the largest challenge almost always comes down to, why didn't I think to share that piece of information with that person or that group? It's almost never the technology. It's almost never the process. It's very simply either giving somebody a heads up early enough or making sure somebody has information. I completely agree with you about that. Now, when we think about the skills procurement would naturally have that make them good at leading implementations, you talked a little bit about the fact that anyone with a technical orientation or a technical background will find it easier to step into this kind of a role. Are there some traditional procurement skills that we might think of as not necessarily being directly derived from experience with implementation, but that actually come in really useful and transfer well, even though that's not why we gained those skills?
Well, procurement are by default excellent negotiators. They are also excellent in trying to squeeze suppliers heavily. So I think sometimes these skills can be very good. So contract negotiations, vendor management, but of course relationship building, because you need to build a relationship with your suppliers. You need to work with them for a long-term strategy and also communicate efficiently with them, because that's usually the role where procurement is actually acting as the client directly during the implementation. Of course, the skills that are very obvious is managing the risks, aligning the deliverables and strategic objectives, explaining the return on investments. So all those skills are very natural in procurement, and they are highly appreciated for any source-to-pay implementation project.
Now, if an individual within procurement, or maybe even a section of the team as a whole, were to think about the skills they should invest in, given the importance of implementation, what are some of the skills gaps that maybe there's an opportunity to actively close to improve how these implementations go?
I think that the major skill gap is really the technical knowledge and sometimes also the data analysis. So being able to collect the data, being able to also understand the current processes, the business processes, and bringing them to the implementation team. It's not an easy skill actually to develop, but it's really being able to really understand how the company is working today in specific areas. Because a process doesn't mean necessarily that you have actually something implemented in a solution. Sending an email is a process. Writing a contract with your pen and paper can be a process as well. So being able to really understand the steps and translate them into a tangible IT kind of like domain is really essential. I think that's the biggest skill gap that we might see. Sometimes also what we see still related to that is the lack of understanding of complex system integrations. That comes more on the IT side, but you can never escape a system integration in a source-to-pay implementation project. So that's sometimes quite critical. But we don't necessarily need a procurement team to have those skills. What we need is we need to have the right team where everybody has the skills that the others do not have, and that team can collaborate effectively, and that should work.
No, that's a very good way of looking at it, because given the timelines we often have to work with, you may need to bring in a skill much more quickly than you could learn it. And so whether it's through a partner or the provider or even someone within your own organization, reaching out to find out where those skills already exist becomes an opportunity. And to our point before, may actually be another helpful communication opportunity to spread information and pull them in.
Yes.
Now, when I think about, we talked about communication challenges. The other biggest thing that always rears its ugly head with implementation is change. Nobody likes change. I'll be the first person to raise my hand and say, I don't like change. Even when change is good for me, I don't necessarily look forward to it. But at the same time, especially given the rate of progress around technology in the world in general, we all more or less accept that change is inevitable and we're all going to be part of it at some point. Before we even start rolling that change out into the organization, how can procurement start to prepare themselves to help others deal with that change that's coming?
I think one of the key factors is that the whole procurement department understands what is coming and they keep the positive attitude in the team. so that the message sent outside of the procurement team is the same, it is clear, it is positive. Nobody will come with something negative during the implementation. That's very important. So keeping this positive attitude. And as I said, communicating frequently, as much as it is possible with the stakeholders. And of course, having a clear change management strategy. So understanding that there will be frustration. There has never been a project without frustration. So there will be frustration, but being able to address the frustration, challenging the needs potentially, and also understanding that frustration might be actually relevant. They might also help the procurement team itself to improve even certain processes. What else? Well, having very clear feedback loops available for the stakeholders. I think those things really are going to help already the procurement team itself to embrace the change and to move forward in implementing it.
I think your point about positivity versus negativity is really important. I know for me, I've spent time helping implement as sort of a third party. And when you're doing that, just because of how your role works, I can't be complaining to other people about this. It could be the most frustrating thing you've dealt with in a long time, and there needs to be an outlet for that, to your point about feedback loops, but placing them appropriately so that that message is constructive and gets to where it needs to go. But when you're in a client-facing role, and whether that's an implementation partner working with the provider, an implementation partner working with the client that's putting the system in place, or frankly, procurement dealing with the distributed users in the organization, it is important to be honest, but to project that positive image. I actually think that's one of those areas where nobody tells you that when you're in procurement. And so knowing how critical it is, you don't want sort of the rumor mill to start carrying this message in the organization. Oh, there's a system coming. It's going to be a pain in the neck. You have to do all this training. And so if procurement can be positive and control your message, back to our points about communication, that has a direct impact on how successful the implementation will be. Now, those frustrations are real, Katy. What are some of the most common frustrations that stakeholders experience and that procurement will need to be prepared to respond to during and post-implementation?
Well, I think one of the biggest frustration is being scared that, my position today might be replaced because of the system, especially today with AI being present in almost all the solutions like in Evalua. So you really have to address this by talking to people that the solution or the system will help them to do their work in a better way. So it's not there to replace their work. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the confusion across the new processes. So if there are new processes implemented while the solution is implemented, there might be a huge confusion because people will have to work in a different way. So again, training the users, communicating is the most important one. And then, of course, the users might also struggle at some point of time with the system's limitations. When a solution like Evalua is implemented, you usually implement it by module. It's very rare to have a big bang implementation where you just take the whole thing and you just throw it at the business. It can happen, but I'm not saying it's the best way. So usually it goes module by module and sub-module by sub-module. So the users might lack of some of those things that they want to do. Those things will come over time, but they are not there yet available. So those are the common frustrations we might see.
Now, connecting those last two questions, trying to be positive and understanding that frustration is very real, what advice do you have for procurement when they find themselves in the situation of having to try to diffuse a frustrated stakeholder or get their feedback and collect it and turn it into something actionable? What's your advice for that type of conversation?
Well, first of all, as I said, acknowledging that the frustration is there, that it is existing, and there is always a reason for that frustration. So really finding the real reason behind the frustration. Is there something really in the system that makes the person frustrated, or is it something else? That's the first most important thing. When that is done, and actually the frustration is in the system, then, communicating effectively, being empathic, stating clearly that, okay, this is not working today. We will add it to our roadmap. It will be implemented in like 2 or 3 months. And then, of course, like saying that today, like to the stakeholders, saying today is not a challenge. It's really an opportunity for us and for you to grow. We value your feedback, and then really trying to make the relationship better over time, so that the people that are actually frustrated, they continue to bring feedback in a more constructive way later on.
Yeah, because it is up to procurement to take that feedback and make a list and figure out, okay, which of these things are we going to act upon short term? Which of these things have to become part of our communication strategy? And stakeholders aren't thinking about that when they're expressing their frustrations. It's one thing if someone comes to you and says, I can't find, fill in the blank, whatever step or piece of information. That's a training issue. They can be instructed on how to do that. But if someone is having a more emotional response to the change and they say something like, I can't use this, this doesn't work for me. Okay, there's not much procurement can do with that. And so that becomes a deeper conversation. How can procurement work with the business to translate that frustration into actionable advice or observations or feedback that they can truthfully then go back and do something about?
Well, just before answering your question, I think one of the best way in those cases, because there will be departments or there will be people or managers who will not be embracing the solution, or they will not be willing to use it. And you cannot usually force, especially, here in the Nordics, you cannot force people to do something if they don't want to. Yeah. So the best way is to find champions, to find some people, some departments that are really actually excited about the whole thing, and then showcase that, hey, that department has been using the solution in that way. They have been able to increase efficiency. They were able to get savings. They got all those great things because they're using the system. Then other people start maybe to look a little bit and start to, they go into a little bit in a gaming mode. Like, I should also maybe use it. Maybe I will get the benefits there. So I think this is a way to quiet down actually the people who might be frustrated. And as I said, you will always have those people who are frustrated. So if there is no real mandate from the top management, there should be at least the understanding that you have to talk to the manager. You really have to bring the value of the solution. You really have to showcase the return on investment. So it's really a constant discussion. Implementing a solution is not, something that has a beginning and an end. It is an ongoing project. It will go onwards, like over time. Even way after the solution has been finally implemented, there will always be some upgrades. There will always be some new features. So it will be a continuous project. And people will come into the company, new employees. They will need also to value. So everything is a continuous improvement.
I actually love your suggestion about finding champions, because that's one of those, and I know I'm being very literal, but okay, I'm looking through my implementation handbook, and there's no step in here about figuring out who's going to be a champion and who's going to speak up. That's something I think that comes with experience, that once you see it work a few times, you can actually start proactively looking for that person or those people or that team and pulling them in earlier and earlier so that the message gets spread even in advance of frustrations in some cases. So to wrap up sort of this, I don't know, let's call it soft skills side of implementation. What I think I hear you saying is that procurement has a twofold responsibility. You have to be positive while being realistic, right? You need to show empathy when dealing with stakeholders, and yet not as far as mandate, but still stand strong about the idea that this is a good idea. We are doing this, right? We're going to move forward. Help me figure out sort of how we can support. Anything else you would suggest around that balance of sort of being firm and confident, but also being empathetic, how to keep one foot in each of those spaces during and after the implementation?
Yeah, I think it's really to have, the how do you say it in English, like a strong hand in a velvet glove. So you have to be still, I don't know what's the exact.
No, you're absolutely right.
But it's really being still very strict, enforcing, you have to use the system because you have to have a purchase order in order to get your invoice approved to streamline. So just trying to explain and continuously explain. Understanding also why it is not working, that's another discussion, but it's possible that, you need to also, as a procurement person, understand that you didn't take everything into account. And there might be, people that are not using the solution because you forgot some specific business processes. So that's totally fine. But as also being self-aware of our own knowledge as a procurement professional, and also letting the others come to us and explain, why things are not working the way. So being very strict, but still being flexible, understanding that, as a procurement professional, you might not know all the bits and bobs that are in the company. You might not know all the processes. You might not know, really how the business is working, like from end to end. You might miss some elements. And that's where actually engaging proactively with business, talking to them, even during coffee breaks, having very nice discussions at events, really trying to understand the reality and not enforcing something necessarily that does not make sense. So that's really important.
Yeah. Now, we started this conversation about implementation by talking about how procurement can prepare themselves to help others deal with change as they go through the process. And I completely agree with your observation that implementation never truly is over. There's either a new release or a new feature, you've moved on to a new module, as you talked about, or simply somebody new comes into the company and needs to be trained and brought online, and their feedback needs to be incorporated. So it seems fair to come back around to where we started. We always like to wrap these conversations by sharing the love and providing some advice. I think given our conversation, maybe thinking a little bit about the self-care that procurement should be prepared to give themselves to get through these challenges makes sense because it is a long-term effort. So what would your advice be for procurement to keep themselves in that position of having a strong hand with the velvet glove on, right? You need some inner strength for that. What advice would you share based on your experience?
Well, I think the first one, which is really close to my heart, is like, I call it practice mindfulness. Well, you don't have necessarily to meditate, right? But I mean, be mindful, be right in the moment. And if you feel that you start to be overwhelmed because there's too much frustration around you, just get out, take a deep breath, go have a walk. Do not interact with people if you are feeling yourself stressed. So usually meditation helps, or, just being like able to do this deep breathing exercises. So that's very important to really calm down. The second most important is potentially to be active, to really, be good in your own body, in your own mind, stay active, do some sports, whatever. More in the project itself, celebrate wins. So as soon as there's a milestone achieved, or for example, you have achieved like as many users who logged into the system and did a certain task, celebrate it. Because even the smaller milestone might be actually the first little step towards a huge company change. Keep also perspective. So everything in life, and also in a source to pay implementation, if there are challenges, that's just temporary. The outcomes usually are worth it. There will be always a better, moment later on. And of course, as a procurement professional implementing a solution, remember to prioritize. We all have too much work, especially in the implementation. Process owners, they will have to do 100 or 1,000 things at the same time. So being able to prioritize, looking at really the importance of every task, and starting the day saying that, I will start to do this thing because that's the most important one. So those are few hints. There might be many others, but I think those are the most important ones.
I think you're selling yourself short by referring to those as hints. I think, and maybe it's because I'm here talking to you on a Friday, your message is really sort of hitting me square. I think that's wisdom that extends far beyond implementation. To your point, we all have so much work to do. There are so many competing priorities and objectives. We all deal with frustration from someone and have to find a way to absorb it and turn it into something healthy, and not let it take over sort of our mood and approach. Katy, I so enjoyed having this conversation with you. If people are watching us talk, or if they're listening to the audio later on, and they would like to reach out and connect with you, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so just get into my LinkedIn profile and connect or follow. That's one way. Alternatively, you can send me an email to my OJC Consulting email address, or you can basically visit the OJC Consulting website and just send a generic email and they will forward it to me. Alternatively, if you send me a message, I will just give you my phone number, and usually using WhatsApp is the best way. But I really welcome, people to send me feedback, to ask questions. I really like also to support young professionals in their career. I get a lot of questions from young procurement professionals that are asking me like, what should I do next? How should I find a new job? What do I need to focus on? And I'm more than happy to support as many people as I can. Of course, I will not be able to answer to everybody, but as many people as I can. Yes.
Excellent. Katy, thank you so much for your time today.